All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on The Longest Day. We are so excited to share a little bit about some research and some really exciting things that are happening here in Indiana. So today, I have some awesome guests joining me, Natalie Sutton and Dr. Lamb. I will let them do their formal introductions. However, wanted to mention that they'll both be joining us for today. So, as most of you know, the Longest Day is a Quit Yourself fundraiser, and it is the association's second signature campaign. So, the awesome thing that I love the most about the Longest Day is participants really get to choose an activity or a passion or a hobby that they have and turn it into a fundraiser. Additionally, I would say there are lots of people in the community who maybe pick an activity that their loved one enjoyed and also turn that into a fundraiser. So we have people joining us all across the US today and in through August to do their event of their choosing. So maybe they're riding bikes, or Natalie sewed some masks and sold. But people are joining us in all different ways, whether it is hanging out with some friends virtually and hosting something that way, or even a small in-person event. So at the end, I will talk a little bit more about the Longest Day, and if you have any questions about getting involved, or if this sparks your interest, we would still love to have you. So what I will do is I will kick it over to Natalie if you want to introduce yourself, as well as Dr. Lamb, because we have some awesome things to share with you all today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Sutton, and I am chapter executive for the Alzheimer's Association Greater Indiana chapter. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to everybody who's participating in the Longest Day and celebrating the summer solstice today. One of the best things about my role with the Alzheimer's Association is that I have the opportunity to work with some really smart people, among them some of the local researchers who are leading the quest for a cure or many cures and treatments for Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'm so excited to introduce all of you to Dr. Bruce Lamb. Dr. Lamb is the executive director of the Paul and Carol Stark Neurosciences Research Institute at Indiana University School of Medicine. We also know him fondly as a board member for the Alzheimer's Association Greater Indiana chapter, and he also serves in a role with our national organization as the vice chair of the Alzheimer's Association's Medical and Scientific Advisory Group. So Dr. Lamb, it is an honor to have you here with us today and to share some research information with our constituents on the Longest Day.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we wanted to open it up first to see if you could just tell us a little bit about your role in Alzheimer's and dementia research and your role and your experience with the Alzheimer's Association.
Yeah, sure. Great. Yeah, I'm a basic science researcher, which means I work with cells and animals and different model systems. And I've been working in the Alzheimer's space for about 30 years. So I've been at this for a while. In my current role, I sort of have multiple different hats that I wear. I'm director of the Neuroscience Institute, which is sort of currently behind me here. There we have research going on. There's a number of Alzheimer's researchers, and we recruited some of the top talent across the country to come to Indiana to really develop, I think, one of the world's top centers for Alzheimer's research. But we also have research in neurotrauma and addiction, some of the other big neuroscience-related disorders. And in other roles I have, in terms of Alzheimer's research, I help co-direct an NIH, this is National Institutes of Health, which is the federal government's source for funding for research, a large consortia of 5 different institutions developing models, animal models for Alzheimer's disease. And then with the goal of getting better models that we can then develop therapies that we can bring to patients. And then just even more recently, as of last fall, I'm sort of co-director of a new drug discovery center, also funded by the NIH. And both of those really are sort of headquartered here in Indiana. So it's really, I think everybody should take pride in sort of what we have right here in our backyard. And then, as you mentioned, I have a role in the national organization in terms of looking at strategic opportunities for funding for their grants program, the International Research Grants Program. So I'm also very aware of all of that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Can you tell us what motivates you to do the work that you do in science to um, advance Alzheimer's and dementia research? Do you have a personal connection to the mission, or what motivates you each and every day?
Sure. I mean, originally it started actually because I was very interested. I first started working in the field when some of the first genetics was being linked to Alzheimer's disease. And these were very rare, thankfully, genetic alterations which actually cause Alzheimer's disease. And that to me, I thought, as a scientist, I thought this was absolutely fascinating, and trying to understand how a single gene could have this profound impact, sort of later in life. And so that's something I just decided I was really interested in as a scientist to work on. Although I would sort of say more recently, certainly it's become more personal, both, I mean, in terms of my interactions with lots of people who come to tour the Neuroscience Center who've been impacted by the disease, family members, caregivers, et cetera. And then more recently, just within the past year and a half or so, my father-in-law, excuse me, was diagnosed with the disease. So yeah, I think and that's when I talk to people and we go out on the road and talk to people. Unfortunately, it's more and more common that you talk to somebody and they have a close personal connection to it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So today we're going to ask you 5 questions that we hear commonly as Morgan and I and our colleagues in the Greater Indiana chapter are out in the community. We know that so many of our constituents and our fundraisers are really passionate about research and about putting an end to Alzheimer's and all other dementia, which is the association's vision. And so when we hear from those people, they often have questions about science and research. And I think you do a great job you can do a much better job than we can of answering those questions and really putting some of this in terms that people can understand. So first, one of the questions that we get commonly and really all the time is, what's happening at this point in time in research? What's current, what's new and exciting? And, it really feels, I think, to many of our constituents that we've been working on this for so long, that some of the news is negative and, we've been working so long and we haven't found treatment. So I ask you, where do you see hope, and why should we remain hopeful as we focus on research?
Sure. Like I mentioned, I've sort of been at this a while, so I certainly can appreciate sort of wanting to find solutions fast. But what I will tell you, I think, and I have a unique appreciation for this, is just how much the field has advanced over that period of time. And I'd say where it's really advanced, and again, maybe that's not as apparent to your average layperson out in the community, is that I think in our understanding of the disease. I mean, I think the basic biology, the basic genetics, some of the very basic kind of understandings of the disease, how it progresses, how much time does that take over one's life, what does it look like, all of those kinds of things. I would argue we have, compared to when I first started, we have so much more information and so much more useful things that we can sort of move forward with. I think where we haven't seen really is what we would call the translation of that into sort of real, outcomes for patients and for families. And I think that still continues to be a struggle. But again, it gives me great hope, I think, because I realize how much we understand now than we did before. And then B, as you suggested, there's a lot of really smart people working on this. And I think it's a matter of time. I can't tell you exactly when. And then the third thing I would sort of say is there are glimmers now, I would sort of say, of things that have really, I think, started to move forward and make me, sort of excited, in terms of the new developments. Things such as, so a lot of work being done now in blood-based biomarkers. One of the it's been one of the holy grails for the field was to have a way that you could sort of tell whether somebody was developing the disease just by having a blood draw, as opposed to having advanced brain imaging or other expensive tests. Could we roll something out that could be done at that level? And for the first time, and this is really over the past 2 years, I would say, really, there now, I think, looks to be, I mean, it's not been rolled out yet, but I think that the science suggests that we will have some blood-based biomarkers within the next few years. And that will just tremendously advance, what we can do, how we design clinical studies, how we design clinical trials, identify the right patient populations to treat in those clinical trials. So those are the kinds of things, again, that give me great hope. And I think people should have great hope. I mean, I think, again, we have to, anytime there has been a failure over the past few years, I sort of look at it as two ways. One is I think we learn something, with a negative, especially if a study's done properly, with a negative study, actually you learn something about, what didn't work and why didn't it work. And then, we need to sort of then redouble our efforts to say, okay, based on all that information we learned, about why it didn't work, what can we do now that's not going to have the same outcome as we did before? And so to me, I think this is unfortunately part of the scientific process and of discovery and of finding the right thing, but I know we will get there.
Wonderful. We appreciate that confidence and just sharing and highlighting some of those great things that are happening in the field. That's another one of the most common questions that we get, and you've alluded to a few of these things, like, for example, biomarkers, but what are the most exciting things that you see happening in research right now? And can you maybe describe what the association's role in some of those activities have been, and talk from the perspective of both what's happening nationally as well as what's happening here in Indiana?
Sure. Yeah, I think in a number of different ways. I think biomarkers is a great, biomarkers, and I would sort of say that together with sort of studies of unique types of Alzheimer's disease, and I'll describe what I mean by that in a minute. So first, I think is the biomarkers, as you suggested. I think, the Alzheimer's Association has really been a leader, I think, in convening groups to get them together from across the globe. There's actually a biomarker consortia that the Alzheimer's Association leads. I've actually attended a couple of their meetings, and it's a way to get, everybody across the world who are working on this, the leading scientists and clinicians, to get together, talk about what are the assays that are coming up, how do we validate them, how do we make sure this will be validated across multiple sites across the world, so that we can really roll something out that's really been validated and really will impact the field. And that's the kind of role I think the Alzheimer's Association has a huge impact in, because again, they're not constrained by governmental boundaries and so they can work across the globe with large numbers of different researchers. And then similarly, there's been studies of some of these more unusual forms of Alzheimer's disease. So one is what's called dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease. And this is the one I actually was referring to when I first entered the field, was when this first was described. And these are thankfully, very rare cases where people develop Alzheimer's disease in their 30s and 40s or even 50s. And they're inherited in families across generations. And the Alzheimer's Association has played a major role in facilitating the one major study of this across the globe, which is called DIAN, or the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network. And they've gotten funding for DIAN. They've really also played a very major organizational role, I think, in trying to get everybody together working on this, which has been hugely successful. This trial has revealed brand new biology about how the disease progresses, what does it look like, what stage might we intervene. All of that information has come out of the DIAN study. And then more recently, there's another form of Alzheimer's disease, which we know almost nothing about, which is also early onset, but it's a little bit later, 50s and 60s generally of age, which we also don't know a whole lot about, what do those patients look like? They look like regular Alzheimer's disease, do they not? And that's part of a large study that actually the Alzheimer's Association is involved with, actually, as part of that study, which is the longitudinal early onset Alzheimer's disease study. And in the Indiana chapter, thankfully also contributed this last year $1 million to support a supplemental study to do genetics on those patients as well. And that's, again, one of these huge studies that's headquartered here in Indiana and led here by Liana Apostolova at IU School of Medicine. So it's, again, and that's another one that's just getting, unfortunately, with the COVID-19, I think they're going to see a little bit of a delay, unfortunately, probably in this study. But, I mean, it is off the ground. They're recruiting patients. They've already started to get some of the initial results, which actually look really interesting.
Fabulous. I know, speaking from my perspective, in 3 years with the association, working with our chapter board to provide $1 million gift to the LEAD study was probably one of my favorite experiences and one of my favorite projects in working with the association. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to one of the conversations and questions that I have all the time with community leaders or with donors. And you know, in our role at the Greater Indiana Chapter 2, we really further advocacy efforts, and we've had such great success at the national level since 2011, really growing research funds from the NIH to Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the questions I get from members of the community is, you know, if we've done so well with federal funds, and I also see that we have, you know, great health sciences and life sciences companies in Indiana. And if the pharmaceutical industry is putting so much money into Alzheimer's and dementia research, then why is it important that the Alzheimer's Association is working on research? And why would I want to fund your work when there are these billions of dollars from other sources being funneled to this? So I'd like to pose that question to you and say to people, why should we support the association's research program?
Yeah, well, so the one thing, and I don't think people realize this, is that, I mean, the association is the third largest raiser for research out of, you know, from the US government, which is number one, the Chinese government, which is number two, and then globally, the Alzheimer's Association would be number three. So that in itself is a pretty major impact, I think, just in terms of dollar amounts. Yes, it's not the billions, but it's in the hundreds of millions for sure. And that has a pretty profound impact. And then I think there's a couple of things that are unique about the way the Alzheimer's Association positioned itself. So first thing is, I mean, the Alzheimer's Association and they should really take a lot of credit for changing this conversation at the national level. I mean, for getting these huge increases in funding, and it is allowed to get things like LEADs funded. And that has really transformed the field. But I was actually just on this MSAG, the Medical and Scientific Advisory Group for the national, just as sort of this started to change, you know, as it was clear federal money was coming. Internally, we had a lot of discussions about, okay, so, you know, given we know this is happening, you know, how does the Alzheimer's Association position itself to be the most impactful? And what we decided was a couple of things. One is to focus on fairly early career. So people who are either in the early stage of their career or were maybe coming new to the field. We're coming from a different field, but we're coming into the field because it's very difficult for those people to get funded straight off the bat from the federal government. But it is possible if they could get seed funds from the Alzheimer's Association to start projects, which then would hopefully lead to that federal funding. And I think that has really been successful. And I think really, you know, has completely changed, I think, sort of, you know, what the association can do and its bang for the buck, you know, sort of thing. You know, I think they can really show that they have a big impact on the field, not just now, but obviously looking into the future, that these will be the next generation of researchers that we're going to need to move things forward. And I'm trying to remember, something else I was going to say, and I've forgotten what I was going to say.
I'm glad it happens to you too, because it happens to me all the time. No, I really appreciate you sharing that unique perspective. And
the other thing, I know what it was, sorry. The other thing that I think is really unique, which I don't think people appreciate also, is, as I mentioned it before, the Alzheimer's Association is a global funder. And this is really truly unique. You know, as I mentioned, the U.S. government generally does not fund, you know, outside of the borders unless there's something really, you know, some collaboration that's truly unique. Same thing certainly for China. They don't really fund outside of their boundaries. Whereas the association, because of its reach and because it's really a global enterprise, can fund people across the globe and also help spur collaborations like LEADS or DIAN or some of these other huge global collaborations. And really, I think everybody realizes that if we're going to solve this disease, you know, we need a global approach and we need everybody collaborating and everybody working together. And I think that's really where the association would play sort of a major role.
That's a great point. Thank you. We are so lucky, as I've mentioned earlier, and you've alluded to a couple of times, that there is great talent in this space. And so tell me a little bit about, what that research talent looks like and why talented researchers and young people are being drawn to the field of Alzheimer's and dementia research.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of reasons. I mean, one, it certainly doesn't hurt that funding levels have increased. I will be honest that I think there's, appreciation that I think before this happened, I will be honest, it was very difficult to get, research grants funded through the federal government before we saw this big bolus of funds coming in. So just as a sort of as a way of description, total funding back before this started was about 350 million, and now it's around 2 billion. So I mean that's just huge, almost an order of magnitude difference. And so it's very difficult to get funding, and so a lot of people were choosing to going to other fields. To be perfectly honest, just because if you look at this and you sort of say, well, is there a future for me as a researcher? And funding is that tight. You will go to another field. You'll go study cancer or something else where funding is not so tight, unfortunately. But with that change, I think has been a complete change in the net conversation, and then things like the Alzheimer's Association funding these early stage career investigators has then sort of accelerated that process of really trying to recruit people, talented young people into the field. And so I would sort of say it is completely changed. And now I think we may talk about this, but the Alzheimer's Association hosts an international conference every year, which this year will be virtual, but it's been held every year for many years, and I go to it every year. And if you ever go to the meeting, I mean, just the excitement and energy that you get by going to that meeting, and it's largely driven, I think, from the young trainees, students, and fellows, and postdocs, and people who are really on the ground and excited about the work they're doing. It's a great experience, and again, it also gives me hope that we have a great talented team behind this.
Fabulous. That is the perfect segue into my last research-oriented question, which is AAIC is coming up at the end of July 27th through 31st, and this year's event will be virtual, as so many of the things we're doing now are virtual. And I just wondered, from your perspective, if you could tell everyone a little bit about what AAIC is and
Sure.
what you're looking forward to this year.
Sure. So AAIC is the largest conference on Alzheimer's disease in the world, and it's held usually every summer in July. And usually it alternates between, it's sometimes been in the U.S., sometimes been in other parts of the world. And this year, because obviously of COVID-19, and the Netherlands actually shut down all of their big gatherings, which is where the meeting was going to be in Amsterdam. That the association, and again, I'll give them a lot of credit, decided to turn it not only virtual, but actually free. So this now any researcher can, and actually any individual can register and attend the meeting. And I think it's an interesting time, because I think this will allow a whole new generation of people to access the meeting who probably couldn't have flown to Amsterdam and paid all of the fees that were required to get there. Will now allow them to attend. And so I'm really interested to sort of see how the meeting goes. And I have a couple of talks myself. And there's the breadth of things that goes on at this meeting is absolutely astonishing if you've never been to a meeting like this, because there's everything from talks about public policy and advocacy to clinical trials and outcomes in clinical trials, to biomarkers, as we discussed, to leads and die-ins, some of these studies I described, as well as all the basic science and drug discovery, and it has caregiving. I mean, you name it, it is at this meeting. So I do encourage people. It really is sort of a unique time. Again, not the entire conference may not be for everybody, and I'll be the first to admit that we'll go over people's heads probably by a fair amount. But there'll be likely some things that you may get. They have plenary some sessions, which usually are tried to be at a little bit higher level. And I would encourage you, if you've never done it, just to sort of attend and see what you think.
Yeah, it's definitely a meeting by scientists for scientists, but having attended, I can wonderfully appreciate the energy in the field and the importance of the conversations that are happening there, and have really enjoyed seeing the way the scientific community collaborates and comes together around this cause. So we're looking forward to that. So Dr. Lamb, I'm going to give you just one final opportunity and ask if there's anything else that you want to share with our participants and volunteers and the community that participates in the longest day.
Sure. I mean, what I would sort of say is, I think sometimes, and I mean, I get this way too sometimes, you're making, feels like relatively small contributions, and I think people wonder sort of what impact they're having. But I think I can tell you just from, from personal experience, like the Alzheimer's grant program is one that I have the most experience with. Getting those funded has meant, the start to somebody's career. And so actually we have somebody actually in the Institute who's a young investigator who started 3 years ago. And he was able to compete for one of the international research grants. And this was the first grant that he had, of his entire life. And so that's pretty impactful and meaningful, and it has the potential. He's now been successful getting additional funding, so I think it has the potential to sort of really, continue to grow that kind of investment. So I think just what contributions you can make, make what you can, and it will have an impact. I can guarantee you.
Thank you so much. And we really appreciate your time today. We know how valuable it is, and we appreciate you joining us. I'm going to turn it quickly to Morgan and say, Morgan, any final reminders for those longest day participants or people who might be watching who haven't yet gotten involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, just thank you so much to Dr. Lamb for joining us today. I think that so many of our constituents in the community are always like dying and itching to learn more information from people like you. And so, I'm really grateful that the association connects those dots, right, and helps them understand where their dollars going. And, when they're questioning themselves or someone is asking them, for them to be able to share, especially, as you said, mentioning living in here in Indiana, like what the research community is doing and how impactful it is here in Indiana. So for anyone who is hosting fundraisers, our season does run through August 31st. So whether you're joining us today or maybe later in the month, or maybe this session has inspired you to do something else, as Dr. Lamb mentioned, every small contribution makes a huge difference. So if you are interested, you can certainly keep your efforts up through the end of August. If you haven't registered, the same goes for you as well. You can still get registered at alz.org/TLD, and we'll be sure to share that link in this posting. But you can also go ahead and get registered and join us. Even if you're not sure what you want to do or you're still looking for ideas, you can get registered and we will reach out to you and help you along the way and figure out how you can best be impactful in your neighborhood or in your backyard, in your church community group, or whatever that looks like. So just wanted to say a big thank you to Natalie and Dr. Lamb again for your time today. I know I've certainly learned a lot, and just so grateful for you giving time and sharing with our constituents. So just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you.